Good morning and good afternoon to our friends and colleagues in Europe. My name is Alina Polyakova. I'm President and CEO of the Center of the European Policy Analysis, coming to you from Washington, D.C. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you tuning in on Zoom, following the conversation on Twitter, and watching on YouTube this discussion that we're about to have with the Foreign Minister of Romania, Bogdan Aurescu, on Black Sea security, NATO, and transatlantic security. This fireside chat is part of CEPA's mission to inform the general public about challenges facing European partners and allies as the public health crisis continues to have increasing economic, political, and national security implications. This is also part of CEPA's extensive and long-standing effort to bring more attention to the Black Sea region as a key arena of contestation where the Kremlin has been making increasingly aggressive incursions which have threatened regional stability and long-term security. As my dear CEPA colleague, General Ben Hodges, has often said, it is because of the Kremlin's activity, there is now an iron curtain over the Black Sea. And last month, CEPA published our capstone report on how NATO should respond to such threats, called One Flank, One Threat, One Presence, which I encourage all of you to have a look at on our website at cepa.org. Before we start the conversation, for those of you tuning in on Zoom, there will be time for questions. You can please pose those questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're following us on Twitter or YouTube, you can tweet questions at us, handle at CEPA, using the hashtag Common Crisis. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. And without further ado, let me extend my warm welcome on behalf of CEPA and all of us as part of the organization and coming from the United States, the Foreign Minister of Romania, His Excellency Bogdan Aurescu. Mr. Minister, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I imagine you're incredibly busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this invitation, and I'm glad to join you once again at a CEPA event. I have attended many CEPA events in the past, but this is the first virtual CEPA event I'm attending, and I do hope that in the not in the very distant future we'll be able to meet personally once again and join you in your very good events that you organize. And not only that, I had the privilege to attend many CEPA events, but I had also the privilege to co-organize with CEPA certain events. In my previous capacity as foreign policy advisor to the President of Romania, we have organized a series of CEPA events in Bucharest with the support of the presidential administration of Romania under the patronage of the President of Romania, Klaus Iohannis. And I'm glad that I'm able to join you. And I would also like to, ask at my turn, everybody to read your report, One Flank, One Threat, One Presence, because it's a very, very good report. And I will refer to it a little bit later.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister. Yes, we have enjoyed a long friendship and partnership with you personally, and also with your colleagues at the ministry and the Ministry of Defense, and of course the embassy here in DC. And I'm very grateful to continue to have the open dialogue and the genuine, sincere conversations that we've had over the years at CEPA. And I also hope that we'll have the chance to meet in person in the not too distant future. I think that's everyone's hope right now. So thank you again. And thank you for mentioning the report. I'm sure we'll get to it as part of this conversation, but let me just start at the point that's been in the news most recently. Romania recently released its draft national defense strategy for the next 4 years, for 2020 to 2024. And it's already gathering some controversy, I gather, mainly because it is the first time that it has particularly noted Russia as a threat to Romania's security as part of its assessment. Could you briefly explain why this was an important shift and how it's being received in Romania today?
Well, actually, thank you for mentioning this. Actually, it is not a sudden shift. And definitely it is not a radical shift. If well, everybody follows a little bit the foreign policy and security policy of Romania as a NATO ally, and also as a strategic partner of the United States in this region on the eastern flank at the Black Sea. Well, you can notice the fact that our strategy of national defense, the draft which was recently presented in order for being adopted by the Romanian Parliament, it is well in the line of continuity with previous defense strategies of Romania, and at the same time, it is not unusual, let's say, to flag the conduct of Russia in the region. And this analysis is not only shared by Romania, it's part of the analysis we have within NATO, within the EU at the same time. It is natural when we analyze the security environment in the region to note the fact that Russian actions in the Black Sea region are generating risks. That's why I've mentioned your report, One Flank, One Threat, One Presence, because we share a lot of your recommendations, which were mentioned in that report. I also know that Romanian experts were consulted in the process of making the report. So, well, there is nothing new, and we also share, for instance, I would flag two of the recommendations from your report, referring to the need for a coherent and comprehensive approach to the eastern flank, and also to have a strategy dedicated to the Black Sea region. And you also mentioned Romania for many times in your report, and this is, I would say, supportive to what we also mentioned in our draft strategy for national defense. For instance, you mentioned the fact that one of the recommendations is that Romania should be reinforced as a center of gravity of NATO's regional deterrence. So this is part of our thinking as well. When we mention what Russia has done in the region, which is obvious for everybody, we want to be transparent. We want to be predictable. We want to address issues which are generating legitimate concerns, and of course, we do not intend to provoke anyone. We are just stating the facts. If we take a look at what happened in the region in the past years, well, I think it's quite clear. For instance, was Crimea lawfully occupied? This is one question that we can put ourselves. Are, for instance, Russian exercises in the Black Sea both offensive and defensive conducive to a peaceful atmosphere? Is there a militarization of Crimea? And this is something that we can note. As well, is the perpetuation of conflicts in the area, such as those in Transnistria, in Donbass, or in the Caucasus, a marker for a peaceful atmosphere in this region? I think the answers to these questions are obvious, and we do not need to repeat. This is what we mentioned also in our national strategy. Contrary to what the Russian media has emphasized, we do not say that Russia is an enemy state, because I noticed that this was a sort of a mantra of the analysis and articles in the Russian press referring to our strategy. To the contrary, we mentioned the conduct, which is aggressive, of Russia in the past years. We mentioned the fact that some of these actions were breaching international law, both principles and norms of international law, and this is again obvious. Against the background of this posture of Russia in the Black Sea region and on the eastern flank, of course, this attracts a natural concern of Romania and the other allies within NATO. That's why NATO has adopted a lot of defensive and deterrence measures on the eastern flank. So it is obvious. We can also remember, for instance, what the president of Russia mentioned in 2016. For instance, when when he said, I quote, that if yesterday in those areas of Romania people simply did not know what it means to be in the crosshairs, then today we will be forced to carry out certain measures to ensure our security. So being in the crosshairs, this is quite a statement. So we simply mention this facts. This is an analysis of the background analysis of the security situation in the region, of the security environment in our region, and of course this is a basis for our strategy for national defense. So this is where we are.
No, thank you, Mr. Minister, for clarifying that. I do think that some things that may seem obvious to us who work on the region and to you, who of course are directly faced with some of the aggressive behavior and activities that the Russian Federation has been carrying out in the Black Sea, it's not always obvious to others. So I think it's increasingly important to point out what the reality of the security situation is in the Black Sea and the extent to which Russia's ability to project military power across the region is a direct threat to the alliance and is a direct threat to other US and European allies, such as Ukraine, of course, which are not part of NATO, but are US allies. And right now, I think that we're facing a precipice in the region where we as the United States and we as the alliance are losing some ground that we could still easily regain, as our report points to an effective path forward in terms of policy and strategy. But we have to act quickly and see this as an urgent matter. And of course, as you point out, Romania has been driving this agenda. Romania, of course, is one of the NATO member states that has been meeting its 2% contribution in terms of the contribution towards NATO as 2% of your defense, of your GDP spending. And that's significant. I think it's important to continue to point that out. Let me just switch gears a little bit because I do want to get to some audience questions that are already coming in. I wanted to also highlight one other issue that, of course, the United States has been very much bringing to light when it comes to our broader security challenges across the world, and that is China. The National Defense Strategy mentions China, but not as aggressively or not as directly as perhaps the US National Defense Strategy. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how Romania sees its relationship with China going forward, and whether you see yourself as being aligned on the US approach to the country as well.
Well, I think it is obvious for everybody that China is a global actor. And the importance of China is growing, and we can see it in our region as well. At the same time, as we discussed, and we have recently discussed about China in a meeting of the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union, of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the European Union. We see China in many ways because according to the joint communication of last year of the European Union of March 2019, China is at the same time a partner in various negotiations, but at the same time is a competitor. And in some areas, well, it might be seen also as a rival because China is promoting a different model of governance. So we have to take into account all these facets. We also discuss about China within NATO, and we discuss how to relate to China in the broader security context. We discuss about many other aspects like 5G, like nuclear, like various formats. You are familiar probably with the 17+1 format, which involves China and countries in Central and Southeast Europe. So there are many facets of how we see China's involvement in our region. So it's a complex picture. We have to see where we can cooperate with China. There are areas where we can develop our cooperation, free trade, environment, and so on. There are also areas where EU and NATO as a whole has certain reservations. Bilaterally, for us, China is a partner, a traditional partner for many years. According to our government program, our foreign policy chapter, we would like to develop a pragmatic and open relationship with China, but at the same time taking into account our economic and security interests. So this is in a nutshell where we are with China. Let me also mention the fact that, because I have mentioned 5G and nuclear. Romania is the first country in the world which concluded the memorandum of understanding with the United States on 5G networks. So we follow the principles of Prague in that regard, and we will implement these principles in our domestic legislation. And we also follow strictly what happens within the EU, because we also develop certain standards and certain rules within the EU as far as 5G is concerned. As far as the nuclear energy cooperation, we have recently taken bold decisions, which were mentioned by Secretary Pompeo last week in the Foreign Affairs meeting of the Foreign Affairs Council, as far as our cooperation with the United States in terms of civil nuclear energy development. This is in a very concise, let's say, way where we are with our thinking on China. China is mentioned in our strategy, in our draft strategy for defense. Of course, not as prominently as Russia, because we have discussed about that. But of course, it is a very important actor in the world that we have to take into account.
Absolutely. China presents a very different set of challenges, of course, than Russia. Both, according to the US, national defense, national security strategies are competitors to our common security, but the challenge is very, very different, especially when we talk about China's greater and greater influence in the global economy. And we, of course, have seen some of the effects that the COVID-19 crisis has had on both highlighting and exposing some of those dependencies across the world between the United States and China, and Europe and China, and how do we tread carefully to ensure our own economic prosperity and security, while at the same time recognizing the kinds of potential threats that China poses. So let me ask you one final question from me before I take it over to the audience. Encourage all of you to tweet your questions at us, put them in the Q&A function on Zoom. But because you alluded to, or I alluded to the pandemic, I wanted to ask, to what extent has the current crisis been changing your foreign policy priorities? You took over as the foreign minister not long before the crisis unfolded. If I'm correct, you became foreign minister in November of 2019, and you were immediately catapulted into this crisis. In a smaller way, I also took over CEPA in February and also was catapulted into the crisis. Obviously, very, very different experiences, but I wanted to get your thoughts on how the ongoing pandemic, the economic effects, the security effects that we're experiencing now is changing your priorities going forward when it comes to foreign policy and national security.
Well, it's interesting how this pandemic affected foreign policy in general. Because indeed, as far as I'm concerned, I'm working in the foreign ministry and in diplomatic affairs for almost 24 years, and I would say that this was the toughest crisis that we have faced in foreign policy as well, because we have put on hold so many issues which are of current concern, and so many dynamics at international level, and we have taken care of very basic but very important at the same time needs. We have taken care of the transit of goods in Europe, the transit of persons. We have dealt a lot with repatriation of our citizens abroad, and by now I think we have repatriated almost 10,000 Romanian citizens since the beginning of the crisis. It might not be a high figure. But for Romania, it is a performance. It is something that it was very, very difficult at some point, and then we have managed to well to cope with. And of course, we have worked on well ensuring the supply chain with medical equipments and protective equipments. And we have noticed, of course, how important a certain autonomy in terms of production and making reserves of such important equipment is. Um, but on the substance, I would say that the main pillars of the Romanian foreign policy are the same. We have, well, three important pillars, which are the following: the membership within the EU and NATO, and the well, effort for us to increase the role of Romania within these two organizations, and also the importance of these two organizations globally and regionally. But also the strategic partnership with the United States. And this didn't change. We follow the same very important fundamental key pillars of our foreign policy, which are underpinned as well by our attachment, which is profound, to multilateralism, to effective multilateralism, and to the observance of international law in international relations. Of course, after this crisis, of course, this crisis is not over, but well, we can already see some lessons learned. We well have enlarged a little bit, and this is also noticeable from the draft strategy of national defense. We have enlarged a little bit the concept of national security in order to include there also issues related to health and well, medical protection of our populations. And this is important in terms of making sure that in the future our health systems will be able to cope with, well, perhaps a second wave of this pandemic or with a similar crisis in the future. It is also important to have, as I mentioned, the autonomy of production of such equipment in order not to stay dependent on external sources of such equipment. We have also noticed, and this is another lesson learned, how disinformation, fake news, and related activities, if I may be diplomatic in that regard, the role they play in our day-to-day activity in our foreign and security policy. We have noticed the growing importance of new technologies like artificial intelligence, and we are not there yet to see what is the full impact of that on our day-to-day lives, including on our foreign policy. But for sure, the connectivity has been put to test, because we were unable to continue our person-to-person physical contacts. But, and this is very important in terms of foreign policy, because this is how we negotiate. But we have managed to develop alternative ways like this one that we are experiencing now. There are already some important lessons learned. I don't agree with those who say that the world will never be the same. There is already this sort of truism which is used in the public space without thinking too much about what it is about. I think the world should continue to stick to some very important values. And these values continue to be multilateralism, attachment to democracy, to the rule of law, to the human rights, and of course the importance of connectivity, but refined a little bit, nuanced a little bit, in order to cope with such a very difficult crisis. We have started to, paradoxically, to talk to each other more frequently. And this is, I think, a good thing. We have also understood better how important it is to have personal contacts and to negotiate directly and informally aspects related to our foreign and security policy. And I'm sure that we will draw even more lessons from this crisis. Well, as we, of course, see the effects of this crisis in many areas. I'm not mentioning here the economic effects, but also they are very important. And now we have at the EU level a very important negotiation going on the recovery plan, on the new multi-annual financial framework, which are being shaped following the crisis, because we have to take into account the effects of this crisis.
So, Mr. Minister, we have 1 minute left. So I want to ask you two questions that come from the audience and have you answer those before we wrap up. The first question is an issue you already touched on, which has to do with the relationship around minorities and Hungary and Romania. You recently met with the foreign minister of Hungary in Bucharest, and you raised several concerns following that meeting, including respect for Romanian sovereignty and coordination of Budapest investments in areas of Romania that are inhabited by the ethnic Hungarian minority. Given the tense relationship or the rising tension in the relationship between Hungary and Romania around this issue, what do you think the realistic prospects are for improvement in relations between the two countries, Romania and Hungary? So hold that thought. And the second question comes more on the security side. Do you believe that there is sufficient mutual defense collaboration between Romania and Ukraine to meet the Russian threat in the Black Sea, the destabilization of Moldova, and Russian proxies in Transnistria? So two easy questions for you to wrap it up. So Mr. Minister, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for these questions. As far as the relationship with Hungary, I think it is important to see first what we want. And Romania wants a very good relationship with Hungary because we have so many things in common. We are in the same region. We have a common border. We have key minorities in each other's country. And we share the positive concern to protect the rights of persons belonging to these minorities. Of course, you mentioned tensions, and tensions were related, in fact, to this commemoration of the 100 years since the signature of the Treaty of Trianon, which is the which is seen by Hungary as an important dramatic and traumatic loss. But in Romania, we don't share the same let's say view about this event. We do not consider this as important as the Hungarian colleagues see it, but from the opposite perspective. Because for us, the Trianon Treaty has a secondary importance. Of course, it is important as a historic and legal document because it confirmed what we have done 2 years before in 1918, which is the Great Union of Romania, a Self-Determination Act, in accordance with the will of the Romanian people to unite all Romanian provinces together in a modern and more effective unitary state. And for us, that is the most important moment in our history. We have celebrated our centenary 2 years ago in 2018. We have celebrated also from the, let's say, the Romanian-US perspective, the fact that this act of self-determination, which was a political and legal act at the same time, was in fact the implementation of the principle of nationalities of President Wilson. At the same time, what we have discussed during that meeting, me and my colleague from Hungary, was that, we can have different approaches on history. We can see it in various ways, but what is important is to not to transfer in our bilateral relation in a conflictual manner the different perspectives on history. We can respect each other's views on history, but what is important, and this was my main message, let's not worsen our bilateral relations because of that, because the past is the past. We have to take a look into the future. We have to develop our relationship as strategic partners, and this is what we want in Romania. We are strategic partners with Hungary since 2002, and we have a lot of trade, a lot of business between us. We have a lot in common in this region, and we want to develop in a positive manner this relationship. So what we hope in the future is to be able to solve these problems that you have mentioned. For instance, this economic development program, which is undertaken by Hungary in one part of Romania, which we do not accept. And we want to conclude an agreement in order to establish what are the parameters of this program in order to be acceptable for Romania. This program should be in conformity with the EU legislation on competition and state aid, should be non-discriminatory, should apply to all citizens of Romania, irrespective of ethnic origin, and to be applied on the whole territory of Romania, not only on one part of Romania. We have the promise of the Hungarian side that we will receive a draft agreement to start the negotiations on that. We have discussed to resume the activity of the Joint Commission on Minorities, on national minorities, in the not too distant future. We hope that all these things that we have discussed will be put to life. On the relationship with Ukraine, we have, of course, this is another important neighbor, and we have the intention to develop this relationship because we support fully the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Romania was the first member state of the European Union to ratify the association agreement of Ukraine with the European Union. And we support the European and Euro-Atlantic aspirations of Ukraine. I have discussed for many times during this pandemic over the phone with my colleague Dmytro Kuleba, and we decided to meet in the near future in Bucharest to discuss all these issues. And last but not least, we have decided to grant assistance, humanitarian assistance, in order to help the Ukrainian authorities to cope with the pandemic. The Romanian government decided to grant equipments, protective equipments worth of almost $2 million to Ukraine. We have done the same with the Republic of Moldova. We have granted assistance of worth of 3.5 million euros to the Republic of Moldova. We will do the same for Ukraine. We will send also a medical team to assist the Ukrainian doctors and nurses to fight against the pandemic, as we have done in the Republic of Moldova, where we have sent 52 persons, out of which 41 doctors and nurses. And this was very much appreciated. So we hope that with Ukraine, we will be able to develop our constructive cooperation. We also have with Ukraine some issues related to the national minorities. It is the famous law on education, which created a lot of concerns for the persons belonging to the Romanian minority in Ukraine, and we are trying to solve that. We have agreed between us, the ministers of foreign affairs, to resume the activity of our joint commission on national minorities as well, to restart the negotiations on a protocol on education, which is being negotiated between us and was put on hold for some time. And well, we have a good dynamic for the time being. There are also issues related to the administrative reform in Ukraine and the relationship with the rights of persons belonging to national minorities. But all these issues are on our agenda, and we try to create a good environment in order to develop our relationship in a positive manner and to solve all these issues.
Well, Mr. Minister, I'm afraid that that's all the time we have. I wish we could continue this conversation. There's so much more to explore. We didn't get to quite a few questions we have from the audience, so I apologize for that, but I think it shows the level of engagement, the level of interest that we have in the issues that your country faces, in the issues facing the Black Sea region more broadly. And I hope that we will have the opportunity to have this conversation in person soon. You're always welcome at CEPA, and look forward to more conversations with you, your colleagues, and of course, our friends in Romania. We have a cooperation in the New Strategy Center based in Bucharest, and very much I'm grateful for you taking the time to speak with us today. I hope you have a good evening and a good weekend, and stay safe. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to be part of CEPA events. And you're also welcome to Bucharest whenever the crisis will allow you to travel. Thank you.
I very much hope so. Thank you and have a good night. Bye-bye.